This is American Literature, Chapter 14, page 312, The Medicine Bag, an adapted story by Virginia Driving Hawk Sneeve. Okay. Literary terms, character's motivation. This is the reason a character does what he or she does in a story. Conflict is the problem that needs to be solved in a story. Selection vocabulary. Impressed, made someone think highly of something. Exaggerated, makes something seem better than it really is. Authentic, genuine, real. Stately, appearing important and worthy of respect. Muttered, said softly. Trembling, shaking, shivering. Reluctantly, not wanting to do something, unwillingly. Descendants, family that comes after someone. Patiently, calmly putting up with something. Seldom, not often, rarely. Protection, defense against harm or danger. Okay. The narrator is the person or character telling the story. In the first two paragraphs, the narrator tells how proud he is of his grandfather. What details help you understand how the narrator feels about his grandfather? My kid sister Cheryl and I like to brag about our grandpa, Joe Ironshell. He was a Sioux Indian. Our friends had always lived in the city. They only knew about Indians from movies and TV. They were impressed by our stories. Maybe we exaggerated and made Grandpa and the reservation seem wonderful. But when we came back to Iowa after visiting Grandpa, we always had some exciting story to tell. We always had some authentic Sioux article to show our friends. One year, Cheryl had new moccasins that Grandpa had made. On another visit, Grandpa gave me a drum. It was small, flat, and round, and was made from cow skin. On the drum was a painting of a warrior riding a horse. Grandpa taught me a real Sioux chant to sing while I beat the drum with the stick. The stick was covered with leather and had a feather on the end. Man, my friends thought that was great. In the second sentence of this next paragraph I'm going to read, the author says, not that we were ashamed of him. At the end of that paragraph, the narrator says, he is ashamed. How might someone be both proud and ashamed of somebody? We never showed our friends a picture of Grandpa. Not that we were ashamed of him, but we knew the great stories we told didn't go with the real thing. Our friends would have laughed if they'd seen a picture of Grandpa. He wasn't tall and stately like Indians on TV. His hair wasn't in braids. It hung in gray strings on his neck, and he was old. He was our great-grandfather. He lived all by himself on the Rosebud Reservation in South Dakota. He didn't live in a teepee, but in a shack made out of logs and tar paper. So when Grandpa came to visit us, I was so ashamed and embarrassed that I wanted to die. There are a lot of yapping poodles and other fancy little dogs in our neighborhood. Most of the time you'll hear them barking one at a time from their yard. But that day it sounded as if a whole pack of them was barking together in one spot. I got up and walked to the curb to see what all the fuss was about. About a block away, someone was walking down the middle of the street. Around this person, a crowd of little kids were yelling and dogs were yapping and growling. Predict who this person will be. What do you think will be the conflict or problem in the story? I watched the group as it slowly came closer. At the center of all the kids and dogs was a man wearing a tall black hat. He'd slow down now and then to look at something in his hand. Then he'd look at the houses on both sides of the street. All of a sudden, I knew who the man was. I felt hot and cold at the same time. I whispered, "Oh no, it's Grandpa." I stood on the curb. I wanted to run and hide, but I couldn't move. Then I got mad when I saw how the yapping dogs were growling and nipping at the old man's baggy pants. He poked at them in a tired way with his cane. "Stupid dogs," I said. I ran to help Grandpa. Was your prediction correct? What details in the story tell you that what the conflict will be? I kicked and yelled at the dogs to drive them away. They put their tails between their legs and ran in all directions. The kids ran to the curb where they watched me and the old man. "Grandpa," I said. My voice cracked and made me feel dumb. I bent to pick up his beat-up suitcase, which was tied shut with a rope. But he put the suitcase right down in the street and shook my hand. "How, Tazuka?" "Grandchild," he said in Sioux. The whole neighborhood was watching. All I could do was stand there and shake the old man's hand. I saw how his gray hair hung down from his big black hat. The hat had a tired-looking feather in it. His suit was wrinkled. It hung like a sack on his body. As he shook my hand, his coat fell open. He was wearing a bright red, shiny shirt. His tie was a string tie with beads on it. His clothes wouldn't look strange on the reservation, but they sure did here. I wanted to sink right into the street. "Hi," I muttered with my head down. When I felt his bony hands trembling, I tried to pull my hand away. I looked at his face and saw how tired he was. I felt like crying. I couldn't think of anything to say. I picked up Grandpa's suitcase and took his arm. I led him up the driveway to our house. Mom was standing on the steps. I don't know how long she'd been watching us. Her hand was over her mouth. She looked as if she couldn't believe what she saw, and then she ran to us. She went to hug Grandpa and then stopped herself. I remembered that the Sioux didn't do things like that. It would have embarrassed Grandpa. "How, Marie?" Grandpa said as he took Mom's hand. She smiled and took his other arm. We helped him up the steps. Just then, the door opened with a bang. Cheryl came running out of the house. She was all smiles. It was clear that she was glad to see Grandpa. I was ashamed of how I felt. Cheryl gave a happy yell. She said, "Grandpa, you came to see us." Grandpa smiled. Mom and I let go of him as he held out his arms to my 10-year-old sister. She was still young enough to be hugged. "Winston Nakala, little girl," he said, and then he fell over. He had passed out. Mom and I carried him into her sewing room. We had a spare bed in there. We put Grandpa on the bed. Mom stood there patting his shoulder. She didn't seem to know what to do. I said, "Shouldn't we call a doctor, Mom?" Cheryl, the narrator's sister, is not ashamed of her grandfather. The narrator is. Why do you think the two characters think so differently about their grandfather? "Yes," she said with a sigh. "You get Grandpa into bed, Martin." Okay. Here you learn that the narrator's name for the first time, and this detail is what you already know about him. Add this detail to what you already know about him. This bag might be important to the story. This is the bag I'm going to read about in this next paragraph. Predict what you think the importance of the bag might be. I reluctantly moved to the bed. Grandpa wouldn't have wanted Mom to take his clothes off, but I didn't want to either. He was so skinny that his coat slipped off easily. When I untied his tie and opened his shirt collar, I felt a small leather bag. It hung from a leather string around his neck. His old cowboy boots were tight. It seemed to hurt him a little as I jerked them off. I put the boots on the floor and saw why they fit so tightly. Each one was stuffed with money. I looked at the money and started to ask about it, but Grandpa's eyes were closed again. Mom came back with some water. She said, "The doctor thinks Grandpa is worn out from the heat." She wiped Grandpa's face with the washcloth, and then she gave a big sigh. "Oh, Heen, Martin," she said. "How do you think he got here?" We found out after the doctor left. Grandpa was sitting up in bed. He was angry because Mom was trying to feed him soup. Dad came home from work just as the doctor was leaving. "Grandpa," he said, "tonight you let Marie feed you." He gently pushed Grandpa back against the pillows. Dad went on, "You're not really sick. The doctor said you just got too tired and hot after your long trip." Grandpa took it easy then. Between sips of soup, he told us about his trip. After our visit to see him, he thought he would like to see where his only living descendants lived and what our home was like. Also, he felt lonely after we left. I knew everyone felt as badly as I did, and Mom felt the worst. Mom was the only family Grandpa had left. Even after Mom married Dad, who's a white man and teaches college in our city, and even after Cheryl and I were born, Mom made sure that every summer we spent a week with Grandpa. How does the storyteller feel about his grandfather now? How have his feelings changed? Predict whether you think Martin's conflict will be over. Why or why not? I never thought that Grandpa would feel lonely after our visits, and none of us noticed how old and weak he had become. But Grandpa knew how old he was getting, and so he came to us. He had ridden buses for 2.5 days. When he came to the city, he was tired and stiff from sitting so long. He had set out walking to find us. Grandpa had stopped to rest on the steps of some building downtown. A policeman found him. Grandpa said that the cop was a good man. The cop had taken Grandpa to the bus stop. He'd waited with Grandpa until the bus came, and then he told the bus driver to let Grandpa out at Bellevue Drive. After Grandpa got off the bus, he started walking again. But when he walked on the sidewalk, he couldn't see the house numbers on the other side of the street. So he walked in the middle of the street. That's when all the little kids and dogs followed him. I knew everybody felt as badly as I did. Yet I was proud of Grandpa. After all, he was 86 years old, and he had never been away from the reservation. But he was brave enough to take a long trip alone. Grandpa asked Mom, "You found the money in my boots?" Mom said, "Martin did." "Grandpa, you shouldn't have carried so much money. What if someone had stolen it from you?" Grandpa laughed. He said, "I would have known if anyone tried to take the boots off my feet. I've saved the money for a long time. It's $100 for my funeral, but you take it now. Use it to buy food while I'm here. I don't want my visit to be hard on you." Dad said, "You don't need to do that, Grandpa. It's good to have you here with us. I'm only sorry we didn't think of bringing you home with us this summer. You wouldn't have had to make such a long, hard trip." This made Grandpa happy. He said, "Thank you. But do not feel bad that you didn't bring me with you. I would not have come then. It was not time." The way he said it, no one could argue with him. To Grandpa and the Sioux, a thing would be done when the time was time to do it. That's the way it was. Grandpa went on looking at me. He said, "Also, I have come because soon it will be time to give Martin the medicine bag." We all knew what that meant. Grandpa thought he was going to die. When a man in the family died, the medicine bag, along with its story, was passed on to the oldest male child. Now you learn more about the medicine bag around Grandpa's neck. Why will Grandpa give the medicine bag to Martin instead of Martin's father? Okay. I didn't know what to say. I had the same hot and cold feeling that I had when I first saw Grandpa in the street. The medicine bag was the dirty leather bag I had found around his neck. I thought, I could never wear such a thing. I almost said it out loud. I thought of having my friends see it in gym class or at the swimming pool. I thought of the smart things they would say, but I knew I would have to take the medicine bag. I swallowed hard and took a step toward the bed. A medicine bag holds objects that protect the person wearing it. What is Martin's conflict or problem now? How do you think he will work the problem out? But Grandpa was tired. He said, "Not now, Martin. It's not time. Now I will sleep." So that's how Grandpa came to be with us for 2 months. My friends kept asking to come to see him. I kept making up reasons why they couldn't. I told myself that I didn't want them laughing at Grandpa. But it really wasn't Grandpa I was afraid they'd laugh at. Cheryl was happy to bring her friends to see Grandpa. Every day after school, she'd bring home a group of kids. There would be a group of giggling girls or little boys with their eyes wide with wonder. Grandpa would sit on the patio and they'd crowd around him. Grandpa would smile in his gentle way. He would patiently answer all their questions. He'd tell them stories of brave warriors, ghosts, and animals. The kids listened without a sound. Those little guys thought Grandpa was great. Finally, my friends came over. This was because nothing I said had stopped them. Hank, who was supposed to be my best friend, said, "We're going to see the great Indian of Bellevue Drive. My brother has seen him 3 times, so he ought to be well enough to see us." When we got to my house, Grandpa was sitting on the patio. He had on his red shirt, but today he also wore a leather vest decorated with beads. Instead of his cowboy boots, he wore moccasins with beads. Of course, he had his old black hat on. He was seldom without it, but his hat had been brushed. The white feather in it looked bright and proud. His silver hair lay over his shirt collar. Grandpa got dressed up. Why do you think he does this? I stared at him, and so did my friends. I heard one of my friends say in a low voice, "Wow." Grandpa looked up. When his eyes met mine, they looked as if they were laughing. He nodded to me and my face got all hot. Grandpa had known all along I was afraid he would embarrass me in front of his friends. "How, Hawk Silas, boys?" He held his hand out, he said, and held out his hand. My friends shook his hand one by one as I told Grandpa their names. They were so polite that I almost laughed. They said, "How there, Grandpa?" and even, "How do you do, sir?" I said, "You guys want some lemonade or something?" No one said anything. They were listening to Grandpa. He was telling them how he'd killed the deer his vest was made from. Grandpa did most of the talking while my friends were there. I was so proud of him. I couldn't believe how quiet and polite my friends were. Mom had to tell them to leave when it was time for supper. As they left, they shook Grandpa's hand. They said to me, "Martin, he's really great." "Yeah, man, I don't blame you for keeping him to yourself. Can we come back?" But after they left, Mom said, "No more visitors for a while, Martin. Grandpa won't say so, but his strength hasn't come back. He likes having people visit, but it makes him tired." That evening, before he went to sleep, Grandpa called me to his room. He said, "Tomorrow, when you come home, it will be time to give you the medicine bag." I felt a hard squeeze where my heart is supposed to be. I was scared, but I said, "Okay, Grandpa." All night I had strange dreams about thunder and lightning on a high hill. From far away I heard the slow beat of a drum. When I woke up in the morning, I felt as if I hadn't slept at all. School seemed like it would never end. When it finally did end, I ran home. Grandpa was in his room sitting on the bed. The shades were down and the place was dark and cool. I sat on the floor in front of Grandpa, but he didn't even look at me. It seemed like a long time before he spoke. At last, Grandpa said, "I sent your mother and sister away. What you will hear today is only for a man's ears. What you will be given is only for a man's hands." Then he was silent. I felt a cold wave down my back. Why does Grandpa tell Martin that what he will hear is only for a man's ears? Grandpa began. "Soon after my father became a man, he made a vision quest to find a spirit guide for his life. You don't know how it was back then. That is when the great Sioux of the Teton Mountains were made to stay on a reservation. The Sioux had a great need for Wankantaka, the Great Spirit, to guide them, but too many of the young men were full of hate. They had no hope. They thought it was no good to look for a vision. Why should they when the best part of their life was gone, when there was nothing for them but the reservation, which they hated? But my father kept to the old ways." Okay. When a Sioux boy turns 12, it's time for him to seek the spirit that will guide and protect him for the rest of his life. He will find this spirit on a vision quest. The boy goes somewhere to be alone. For 3 or 4 days and nights, he does not eat or drink anything. As he grows weaker, he begins to dream. After the 4 days are over, he tells the holy man, or medicine man, about his dreams. The medicine man explains the dreams and tells the boy what his spirit guide is. Boys are often renamed after their first vision quest. The name is based on their vision and becomes their adult name. According to the Sioux, Wakantanka is the greatest spirit and creator of the world. Okay, so grandfather goes on to tell about his father. He said, "My father got ready for his quest with a sweat bath to make himself clean inside and out. Then he went alone to a high hill without food to pray. After 3 days, he was given his sacred dream. In the dream, he looked a long time, and then he found the white man's iron. My father did not understand this vision of finding iron. This belonged to the white people, and at that time they were the enemy. He came down from the hill to wash himself in the stream below. There he found a place where a camp had been. At the place where a fire had been built, there was a broken iron kettle. The broken kettle was like a shell. This was a sign that meant his dream was true. My father took a piece of the iron for his medicine bag. He had made the bag from elk skin years before to use for his vision quest. My father went back to his village. He told his dream to the wise old men of the tribe. They gave him the name Iron Shell. But they too did not understand my father's dream. My father was now Iron Shell, kept the piece of iron with him at all times. He believed that it gave him protection from the evil things that went on in those sad days. Then a terrible thing happened to Iron Shell. Soldiers took him and several other young men away from their homes. The young men were sent far away to a white man's school. Iron Shell was angry and lonely. He missed his parents and the young girl he had just married. At first, Iron Shell would not try to learn. He would not let the teacher try to change him. One day, it was his turn to work the school's blacksmith shop. As he walked into the shop, he knew why his medicine had brought him there. Now he would learn and work with the white man's iron. A blacksmith is a person who makes metal objects such as horseshoes. Iron Shell became a blacksmith. That was his work when he came back to the reservation. All his life he kept the medicine bag with him and never let it go. When he was old and I was a man, he gave it to me. This was because no one made the Vision Quest anymore. Grandpa stopped talking. Then he covered his face with his hands. I stared at him. I couldn't believe what I saw. Grandpa's shoulders were shaking with quiet sobs. I looked away until he began to speak again. He said, I kept the bag until my son, your mother's father, was a man and had to leave us. He had to fight in the war across the ocean. I gave him the bag. I felt it would keep him safe when he was fighting, but he did not take it with him. He was afraid that he would lose it. He died in a far-off place. If Grandpa's son is Martin's mother's father, who is he to Martin? What relation is Grandpa to Martin? Again, Grandpa was still. I felt his sadness around me. Grandpa cleared his throat. He said, My son had only a daughter, your mother. It's not right for her to know these things. He opened his shirt, pulled out the leather bag, and lifted it over his head. He held the bag in his hand. He turned it over as if he wanted to remember forever how it looked. Grandpa opened the bag and took out 2 things that were inside. He said, In the bag is the broken piece of iron kettle, a small rock from the hill of the Vision Quest, and a piece of the sacred sage. He held the bag upside down, and dust, what was left of the sage, fell out. Sage is an herb that is believed to have the power to purify or cleanse oneself. Grandpa said, After the bag is yours, you must put a piece of sage inside. Never open the bag again until you pass it on to your son. Grandpa put back the small stone and the piece of iron. Then he tied the bag. Somehow I knew it was time to stand up. Grandpa slowly got up from the bed. He stood in front of me and held the bag before my face. I closed my eyes. I waited for him to put the bag over my head. Grandpa said, No, you don't need to wear it. He put the soft leather bag in my hand. He closed my other hand over it. He said, It would not be right to wear it. In this time and place, no one will understand. Put it away in a safe place until you are on the reservation again. Wear it then, when you put in a new piece of the sacred sage. How do Grandpa's words to Martin show that he understands the conflict Martin feels? How does he help Martin solve the conflict? Grandpa turned and sat again on the bed. He leaned his head against the pillow in a tired way. He said, Go, I will sleep now. I said, Thank you, Grandpa, in a soft voice. I left with the bag in my hands. That night, Mom and Dad took Grandpa to the hospital. 2 weeks later, I stood alone on the land of the reservation. I put the sacred sage in my medicine bag. Okay. The Sioux Nation. The Sioux are not a single tribe of American Indians. They are a nation of tribes. The Dakota were the mother tribe. Over time, the Dakota split into 3 tribes. These 3 tribes are the Dakota, Lakota, or Teton, and Yankton, or Nakota. Each tribe is also broken into smaller groups called bands. Originally, the Sioux lived on the American plains. This area is now Iowa, Minnesota, and North and South Dakota. But in the 1800s, the United States expanded. Settlers from the East Coast moved through the Sioux land into the 1840s and 50s. There were many conflicts. Then, in 1874, gold was discovered on the Sioux land. Settlers rushed into the area. Shortly after the gold rush, the U.S. government forced the Sioux onto reservations. Conditions on reservations were terrible. There were too many people for too little land. People often did not have enough to eat. Many got sick and died. Even on the reservations, the conflicts were not over. In 1890, U.S. soldiers attacked the Sioux at Wounded Knee, South Dakota. Over 250 Sioux were killed. Today, many Sioux still live on reservations. Others live off the reservations in cities and towns. All right, literature practice. Answer these questions on a separate sheet of paper. Why is the author so embarrassed when Grandpa comes to visit? Number 2, Why is Grandpa's motivation to come to see the family? What is Grandpa's motivation to come to see the family? Number 3, what is the conflict in the story? Number 4, why does Grandpa tell Martin about the vision quest?